Do you ever wonder about the Bible? I was thinking about this, and I know it sounds silly for many of us, maybe, but I was wondering if anyone thinks about or wonders about or questions why the Old Testament is put into the same book as the New Testament. The New Testament, of course, we know tells the story of salvation history for when God sends his son Jesus into the world. And the Old Testament tells the story of salvation history for God's chosen people, the Jewish people. But a lot of people will say, well, now that Jesus has come in the New Testament, we don't really need to bother about the Old Testament because, after all, it's old and Jesus has come to do something new. But I think something, again, that maybe is obvious, maybe not to everyone, though, but something that is really important is actually that the New Testament was written mostly by Jewish men. So that is people who were very familiar and had made their life out of following and knowing what was in the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. They didn't call it that. And for that matter, Jesus himself was a Jewish man. And he regularly, as he's preaching and teaching in the Gospels, he regularly makes mention of things that take place in the Old Testament, talking about Moses and Noah and manna in the desert, the law and the prophets, talking about King David. So many different things he makes reference of in the Old Testament that if we aren't familiar with it, then we're not really going to capture what it is that he's trying to teach us. And for that matter, as we read the Gospels, 2 out of 4 of the Gospel writers were Jewish. In fact, Matthew, one of my favorite Gospels, his Gospel makes so many references to prophecies and things from the Old Testament that if we're not familiar with it, then the references just go straight over our head. But then Paul and Peter and James and John and Jude, all these guys who wrote letters in the Old Testament, they're all Jewish. And so they're writing from a Jewish perspective. So if we want to understand them, it would make sense that we should want to understand the Jewish perspective, which is found in the Old Testament, at the very least. You think of it like this. Just imagine someone comes to the United States from a very underdeveloped country. And they're interacting with you and they ask you, they see you put these things into your ears. And they're like, what are those? And you say, oh, they're my earbuds. What do you do with them? Well, I can download music on the internet and then, listen to them with my earbuds. And what's the first question they're going to ask you? They're going to be like, wait a minute, what's the internet? And then you explain to the internet is well, it's the thing that you can go buy music and download it, or you can watch YouTube videos. You can, do all kinds of things, check sports scores and politics and watch the news and all of those things that you've just mentioned to them. They're going to be like, what are you talking about? You see how you're going to have to explain everything to them, because for us, it's like second nature. Of course, I have all these things. But for someone who's not familiar with the American context, it's all these things are totally foreign to them. It's the same thing with the Bible. It's yeah, we can read the New Testament, and we should read the New Testament, absolutely, and read about the story of Jesus. But if we don't understand the Old Testament scriptures, we're not really going to be able to fully capture the mind of Jesus. We're not going to be able to fully understand what it is that he's preaching and teaching. We're not going to be able to fully understand what he's doing when he establishes a church with leadership structures and those kinds of things. If we don't understand the worldview of the Old Testament, then when Jesus comes along and preaches and teaches, it's going to be like just dropping into a country with no context of what they believe, what they understand, the way that they see life. So it's really important for us to read, of course, the New Testament, absolutely, but also to read the Old Testament as well. And this is something that I know can be really intimidating for people, because the Bible, all by itself is a really big book, and it's really intimidating, and it's just I don't know how to start. I don't know where to read. But we actually do have a gift in today's world that the internet isn't helpful for everything, but it is helpful for some things. And some of those things are that there are so many incredible Catholic resources online that can help us to understand what the Bible teaches in the New Testament as well as in the Old Testament. There's so many incredible resources, podcasts and books and videos and whatever audio files, classes that we can purchase online or listen to, whatever. There's so many incredible things that we can use. And so I just want to encourage you to use them. This would be a great thing to do during Lent, to dive into the scriptures. And if you don't know where to start, I know that sometimes I can have such a big task in front of me that can be overwhelming and where am I supposed to start? And something that I've just found is when I feel overwhelmed by something, the best place to start is simply to start somewhere, to just pick a spot and go with it. And maybe it won't be the perfect spot, but just pick a spot and go with it and run with it. Because as we dive in and understand the scriptures, both the Old and the New Testaments together, it's going to help the Catholic doctrines of baptism, the Catholic doctrines of the Eucharist, the doctrines on the church. So many of our Catholic doctrines, it's going to help them come alive in a fresh way. Like they're going to pop for you. And then it's going to help you to see the incredible depth and riches of our Catholic Christian faith.